everyone, I'm Heather Poduska, and welcome to Thrive, the show where I bring you tips, resources, and people to help you create a more abundant business and life. You're in for high-value content coming to you from industry leaders who are growing their business, making an impact, and rocking their brands. And I'm so thrilled to have my guest here with me tonight, Kim Savage. Kim is the hot and upcoming author of her new debut novel, After the Woods. It's a psychological thriller filled with murder, mystery, and teenage drama that will appeal to young adults and adults alike. Kim's works have been featured in magazines such as the 6 Minute Magazine, the Drum Magazine, and the Red Fez. And she's lucky enough to be represented by this year's #1 children's literature agent and young adult literature agent, Sarah Crow. And we're lucky enough to have her here tonight before Hollywood sweeps her away. Welcome, Kim. I'm so thrilled to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here.
So you are the debut writer for this new novel of young adult literature. How did you pick that genre to start with?
Well, you know, I didn't plan to write a young adult book. It was just my writing a story, and that's what it happened to be. You know, it's kind of an interesting time right now for what they call YA literature. You know, a few years ago, there was a study by Publishers Weekly, I think, that said about 55% of so-called young adult novels are being bought by adults over the age of 18. So you have these young adults, and you have adults buying this this new group of novels that have you know, interesting, complex main characters and mature subject matter and sort of complicated storylines. So there's almost a blurring, I think, of young adult and adult literature, and I think that's kind of the home where After the Woods lives, if that makes sense. But you know, I think those labels are sort of tired anyway. I write books for people who like psychological thrillers and like, I guess, sort of complicated, non-traditional heroines, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that it's a psychological thriller, and looking at you, you're such a lovely woman, and I know we know each other, you're a mom, and where does that come from inside of you, that those voices and those characters that are so different from what we see on the outside?
Yeah, I mean, the dark stuff. Right. There are definitely dark things in After the Woods. I mean, on its face, we have a character, Donald Jessup, who is a predator. He's a paroled sexual offender. He is the abductor. He is dark and scary. The moments where my main character, Julia, is in the woods are definitely scary, but I find the dark parts of the novel really not to be those things. I find them to be sort of the characters that you're forced to identify with that you maybe don't want to identify with. There are a lot of so-called hateable heroines, they say, in my novel, I guess. And I find that to be sort of the dark part. But you know, really, I don't set out to write dark matter. Well, specifically with After the Woods, I was interested in the question of sacrifice. And I wondered, would you sacrifice your own life to save your best friend? And then I created a character who would do that. And then I wondered about the reverse. I wondered, would you sacrifice your best friend to save yourself? And then I created a character who would do that. And I think the story that evolved After the Woods, it naturally creates a so-called dark story.
So what did you discover, and what realizations did you come to about sacrifice?
Right. You know, I was sort of tapping that teenage part of myself, I guess, that, and I was thinking back, sort of when you have that moment when you are a teenager, when your friends supersede the importance of everyone else. You know, they become more important than your family. So I was tapping that part of my memory. And what did I discover? You know, my characters went in very different directions than I thought that they would. But I guess what I discovered is you'd go pretty far to save your friend, and then also for your own personal freedom, and that's what one of the other characters does.
So it's so interesting. You said that you were surprised by your characters. So do you not know where they're going to go as you're writing? Is it predetermined when you're writing, or do they take on their own lives and go in ways that you don't know they're going to go?
Right. Well, okay, so am I a seat of the pantser or a plotter? I think is the question. I think that's the question. I'm a plotter. You know, I just said that my characters surprise me sometimes, but really, to write psychological suspense, you have to be very specific in your plotting because it can go awry very fast. And you need to lay clues, of course, as you go along. So I have a pretty good sense of where they're going to go, but the best parts and the most exciting parts for me are when it's pure emotion on the page, and when a character has a revelation, I'm also having that revelation. So in those moments, I get little nice surprises.
That's very cool. So it kind of sounds like it's cathartic for the writer to do that as well.
It is. It can be cathartic. It can be draining.
Sure.
Because, you know, your voice becomes, in my case, my voice becomes Julia's voice, and Julia is the main character, and the entire story is told in first person in her voice. Writing for me is more than cathartic. You know, it's a vocation, I think, over a job. So it's
maybe a little of both.
It's mostly a vocation, I would say, quite honestly, and I feel very lucky in that way.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I know that when you're reading, sometimes as the reader, something can be cathartic because you're having. I was just having this conversation with somebody about speaking, because I teach speaking, and I teach people to perform and to really move their audiences. And she was saying, you know, the part that I get stuck on is I get so emotional that I get to that ugly cry. And we were talking about that, and I was saying, your role of the performer is not to indulge your own emotions when you're performing. You're there to serve the audience. And so as an audience member, you get that experience of having the catharsis and having that emotional transformation as you're experiencing the reading or the performance. But as the performer or the person writing, you might not have the luxury of having that as you are doing your craft.
Right, right. I agree, because you always have to maintain control, as you suggested.
Right.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, that's part of sort of being a professional writer or a professional singer or whatnot. But what I do try to do is, again, make that reader have the cathartic experience. And what's kind of been interesting for me lately, sort of the angle, I guess, if that's a fair word, that I've been talking about a lot is the so-called hateable heroine. So I have some characters in my novel who are difficult to understand. It's hard to understand why they do what they do. And some of the things they do are kind of unsavory. But I think I want the reader to be able to identify with those parts in those characters that they may find in themselves and not like, or that they can just say, you know, that is distasteful to me. They can sort of recognize their own moral superiority in reading that character.
So do you think that teenagers find that helpful to see that in other teens? You know, I think they try. I know that I have kids, and they try so hard to be good all the time, and we want them to be good, right? And we want them to be good kids, but we're all human beings, and we have the dark side, we have our psyches, we have our unconscious, our subconscious, and those things are wily. Yeah. So how do you talk about that? Do you think that it's useful for teens to read things that are dark?
You know, I do, because I think there is a real danger in girls feeling like they always have to be likable for so many reasons. A longer conversation than we can have here, or maybe another time. But I think where it's useful is that they can see these characters and they can think, I wouldn't make those choices, but I understand why they would. So everything is not black and white. I think it's safer for them to be able to, or more helpful for them to be understanding of the gray areas, and also to understand that human beings are flawed, right? And that they can be flawed too. You know, if a dark book takes you there, then I'm all for it. Yeah, and I think sometimes as parents we get too precious about our kids. I know I do, so I'm speaking for myself. But you know, don't look at that, don't read that, don't have that experience. I don't want anything bad to happen to you because of that. But I know my kids sometimes say, "Mom, come on, I can handle this." So I think that having that in front of you to say, oh, I see that, I relate that, I feel that, I don't have to act on that, but I can have this experience reading this book. I think that's really great. Well, I think what's cool too about sort of the YA crossover novel, and that's sort of what they call After the Woods, it appeals to both young adults and adults, is that you can read the book along with your child. And you can talk about the things that made you uncomfortable or that you recognized in yourself or in somebody that you know. And it can start sort of an interesting dialogue in that way, because there are enough complicated themes to interest an adult and there's enough action, and they're, you know, the kinds of things that appeal to young adult readers.
Well, speaking of reading, would you be willing to indulge us? And I didn't give a lot of information about the characters, so maybe you can give a little, you know, synopsis and what we're going to be hearing.
Sure. Well, After the Woods is about two best friends, Julia and Liv, where one saves the other from an abductor and got caught, and she spends 2 terrifying nights in the woods that she remembers only in flashbacks. And After the Woods starts 1 year later when a dead girl turns up in those same woods, and then clues begin to emerge that call everything that happened that day into question. And the story's told, as I said, from Julia's point of view. She's the girl who risked her life for her friend, and each chapter is marked by the number of days since the abduction, right up to the moment where Julia loses her memories. But I'll start with chapter 1. Sorry.
No problem, I've been there.
1. 353 days after the woods. Statistically speaking, girls like me don't come back when guys like Donald Jessup take us. According to my research, in 88.5% of all abductions, the kid is killed within the first 4 hours. In 76% of those cases, it's within the first 2 hours. So when they found me alive after nearly 2 days, the reporters called it a miracle. They liked it even better when they found out Donald Jessup didn't want me at first. He wanted Liv, but I took her place. Not only did they have a miracle, they had a martyr. In the 11 months since the abduction, more than half of the Shiverton Star's stories, so 32 of them, have been about us. And Paula Papadimitriou, who lives right here in Shiverton and anchors the evening WFYT News, still won't leave us alone. Liv says we must move on. It had rained a lot that November, and everyone's basement got water, and the high school gym flooded. The track warped in places where the water underneath forced it up, so the track team had to run in a pack all over town. Off hours and against coach's rules, we trained in the woods. I think Liv reminded Donald Jessup of a deer, all knees and angles and big brown eyes. In his sick mind, he thought he was the Greek hunter god Zagreus, his avatar in Prey, which he played 24/7 in his mother's house. Zagreus is the ancient Greek word for hunter. My theory is Donald Jessup couldn't get enough of virtual Prey and decided to bring the action to life. I'll stop there.
Wow. Intense. That was great. I'm on the edge of my seat.
I hope you are. I'm so glad.
Yeah, and I loved how you read it too. As I was listening to you, I thought, I hope she's going to be reading this and doing audiobooks.
Oh my goodness. Not very many authors get to read their own audiobooks unless you're John Green, and I don't even think he reads his own audiobooks.
I loved it. I loved the, you know, the intonation and the pauses. It was very dramatic.
Thank you.
I was brought in. So speaking of, you know, the next big thing for the book, now what about, you know, everybody thinks, oh, I'm going to write a book. Is there a movie? How does that work? How does that work? Because I think a lot of people think you write a book, you get a movie. How does that process work?
Right. So an agent, that's why you have a literary agent, and really anyone who's published with a traditional publisher does. There are very, very few exceptions. That person is your business agent, and they sub out your rights. So they work to sell your film rights, and they work to sell your foreign rights. And actually, I have some good news that I can share with you. Exclusive.
Yeah.
I just sold my agent, I should say, just sold my Spanish rights to After the Woods.
Wow,
so, yeah,
that's
I'm
wonderful.
Thank you. A Spanish publisher. There'll be a Spanish version of the novel, which is exciting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but no film rights yet, but that would be kind of exciting.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of people film movies in Boston, so you wouldn't even have to go to Hollywood.
Well, and this is a local story. So the town that After the Woods takes place in is called Shiverton, but it's really Winchester. And anybody who lives here is going to know that.
I'm going to think twice about going for a walk in the woods now.
Well, in the woods is the Fells. So the woods is, in fact, the Middlesex Fells.
Yeah.
And it's called that in the book, right there. So, and I spent some time, you know, that's how I did some of my research. I'm a little bit of a method writer, and I like to be in that space to see, you know, what kinds of noises Julia would hear, what the light looks like at different times of day, that sort of thing.
So were you ever freaked out? Because, you know, we've had a couple of things locally where, you know, there have been some close calls with kids. I mean, did that story sit with you at night when you were in bed and, you know, Did it, or as a writer, can you detach from that and say, this is my, you know, if I sing something that, an opera that's got a really sad storyline, I don't necessarily have to bring that to bed with me, but you know, it's not me going into the woods where I might take my kids for a walk.
Right, right. I mean, yeah, of course I compartmentalize. For a long time, I couldn't write when my kids were awake. And it's not just because when you're asleep, no one can ask you for anything. But I really did write out almost all of After the Woods at night after the kids were in bed, through the night. My neighbors would see the third floor lights on all night long. Can't do that anymore, but it catches up with you. But the reason really was because I didn't want to share that headspace with my kids. I had to sort of draw a line.
Yeah.
And you know, I think it was, I'm going to get this wrong here, but I think it was W.H. Auden who said, we write to keep our fears at bay. You know, so I am writing about something that does not sit well with me. So the way that I did it was to keep a physically separate space and a separate headspace too for a while.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting you're saying that I wrote for a reason to write during the night, but sometimes people who are going for big things in their lives, they have to, especially mommies, right? We're mommies, you have to find those pockets of time. And so how did you, besides writing at night, how have you been able to balance being someone who's really, you know, you kind of live in your purpose and your dream and you wanted to be a writer and you're doing, how are you balancing that with being a parent?
Right. You know, letting everything go. There's another author who says, let the lettuce wilt. My house is not perfect. Completely letting up control, letting the kids do things on their own that I didn't used to, but everyone is better for it. Yeah. Being happy with or comfortable with being imperfect, I think, in other areas.
Yeah, and I read something, it was the One Simple Thing, there's a book called that about choosing your one thing and really going for it, and I think it was that author that said, really successful people learn to live with a certain amount of chaos.
Exactly.
Because you can't be perfect in every area.
Right.
So I think that's really true. But another part of being successful is marketing. So what have you done to market the book? What's working? What do you find is really fun to do? If someone was wanting to write a book, what would you suggest to them to do to kind of get the wheels turning? Yeah,
well, full disclosure, one of the perks of being with a traditional publisher is that I am assigned a publicist. So I have a publicist who is smart, so smart, and you know, real firecracker. But we work as partners. I've said this before. It's a little bit like being a nun in the morning and a prostitute in the afternoon. You know, you have to get used to it. So the writing happens in the morning and the promotion happens in the afternoon. But you know, it happens every single day. There isn't a day that goes by where I don't get on social media and get my message out there. The thing is, for me, I'm not incredibly comfortable with the self-promotion aspect. It does not come naturally to me. I'm an introvert. It feels weird. You have to get over that. But what I've come to do is sort of understand that the better way for me to think about it is to consider it making meaningful connections with readers, because if I can get on social media and do that, that's fun for me. You know, and I want to do it, and I try to do it every day, and then it's incredibly satisfying.
Yeah.
So I'll do that at book signings or at book festivals, or even just, you know, keeping a few bloggers with whom I tweet all the time, and we share little things that are going on in our lives.
Well, you know, there's some really famous introverts. Hillary Clinton is a self-proclaimed introvert.
I'm all right with that.
Yeah, so there you go. But I think that what you said of being consistent, and that's one of the things when people are trying to build a presence, the three things that you're supposed to be is clear on your message, and you have a book, you're very clear on your message in your book, consistent, and constant, so that your message and your presence isn't changing and morphing, unless you're making a conscious change. But you're not showing up in one place as one thing and showing up in another place as another thing. But that consistency that builds that trust factor and that likability, and oh, I know her. So how do you feel about, I know you said you're an introvert, you're not so comfortable with the promotion part of it, but how do you feel about being known?
Not sure I am known.
Well, the possibility of being known, because as the book, you know, I mean, the book takes traction. You're going to become, we hope, more known.
Sure. You know, again, as long as it sort of stays in the realm of making meaningful contact with readers, I guess, where I can have conversations with people who have read my book and who like it or don't like it and can tell me why, then I'm okay with that. Cool. Yeah. You know, I think everything you say about marketing is just so incredibly true. Having been on the other end of this, having been a reporter for a while, if you can find that angle, or you can hook something that you're interested in talking about with something in the news, or something that's a trend, or something that they're having a public conversation about, and getting that message out there too, that's worked for me.
And I think, don't you think that would work for an entrepreneur if they had a business, to find that hook, that's something relevant, that's something timely?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have any tips about how to approach reporters or how to approach different outlets? You've been in different magazines. How do you make that initial contact?
Right.
Because your life, I don't know if we mentioned this, but you were a journalist before.
I was,
so you were on the other side of that.
Yes, right. So again, having an angle, having a great short pitch. In terms of being an author, trying to become a published author, I think there are two things to keep in mind. I mean, you do need an agent for sure, but beyond that, well, first you have to get the agent, don't you? So really the agent is the first person you're trying to hook.
So do you have to pitch the agent?
You do. You pitch the agent, and you really sort of need one of two things, I think, and I might be wrong. You need a high concept. And everyone's about high concept.
What does that mean, high concept?
So it's a story that you can pitch in a line. It's something that's easily explained and you instantaneously understand it. I have a good friend, Randy Pink, who has a book coming out this year. It's called Wearing White. And the story is about an African-American girl who goes to bed wanting to become white, and she wakes up white. Wow. Easy to explain, but then you have to execute that very, very well, obviously. And then the other way is to have a really great story. It's all that matters.
And that's true in business too, with your brand. It's about the story. Even bigger businesses are starting to catch on to that with social media, that our society is becoming more connected in that way, and it's the narrative. People are drawn in by narrative. So even if it's GE, that there's got to be a narrative to whatever it is that they're promoting.
That's right. That's right. If the agent doesn't want to hear your story, they're never going to represent you. So it's that story that has to hook them, and keep them interested.
I mean, since we were cavemen, right? I mean, it was like, we were just using our hands to explain our story. So cool. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. And I know that you wanted to talk to the audience that we have watching now about participating in some way to get their hands on a book, maybe?
Yeah, well, After the Woods is released on February 23rd. But you can pre-order it now on Amazon, or preferably at your local bookstore, your independent bookstore. But what I would like to offer is, if you pre-order After the Woods now and you send me your receipt or a copy of your receipt, and my email is kimsavageauthor@icloud.com, I will enter you into a contest where we'll pick 5 people who will receive an autographed book plate, which will go inside of your book, and some really cool, fun swag.
Cool. Well, I'm sure people will love to get their hands on it because it sounds so exciting. And I love that you said it's something, my favorite thing that you said was that it's something that you can read with your kids to have meaningful discussions about it, to explore that. I love that part of it, and I can't wait to read it too.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So I always ask all of my guests at the end of the show, as we're here, we're so lucky just to be here, to have this conversation. What are you most grateful for?
Oh gosh. We were talking a little bit about this before, but really having a vocation over a job, that's what I would call writing for me. Also having an editor who is seasoned and makes my work so much better, and an agent who knows exactly the right home for my work. And finally, a husband who doesn't mind keyboard tapping in his ear when he's trying to fall asleep. Thanks, Gary.
Well, I'm thankful for having you here. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights, and for I want to applaud you for taking that leap and sharing your gifts, because I think we all need to have our voices heard, whether it's in their writing, if it's being a mom, if it's being a singer or a business person. And it's a leap of faith, and it takes a lot of courage to do it. So I applaud you, and I thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you all for staying with us as well. As always, until next time, here's to hitting all your high notes. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.